Okay. Well, welcome everyone to our regular session of the HPAC membership. And Glenn Weinreb will be our special guest today. It's really a pleasure to be able to have him join us. He is a graduate of MIT, still strongly connected with MIT, and he may talk more about that. But he is director of the AspenCore Climate Solutions Research Center. And Glenn brings to us an expansive vision on dealing with our current predicament, as you will see. Now, he will explore with us today the following question, which he has presented. Is it possible for HPAC to save the planet with a climate moonshot? And if so, how might we get started? So Glenn has incorporated his ideas and perspectives into a series of videos to provoke serious consideration of his proposals. And I would encourage you to view some of these videos. A couple of links were in today's session announcement. So let me now turn over to Glenn to launch us into a stimulating consideration of his provocative question. Glenn, take it away.
Hi, my name's Glenn Weinreb. I'm director of the AspenCore Climate Solutions Research Center. And today we're going to explore the following question. Is it possible for HPAC to save the planet with a climate moonshot? And if so, how might they get it started? Okay, so let's first define terms. Climate moonshot might be defined as conducting R&D to the extent required to solve the entire climate problem. And one might be wondering, well, how do you define the word solve? Well, one might define solve as preventing the collapse of sea ice, preventing the collapse of ocean currents, preventing the collapse of West Antarctic ice sheet, and bending the global warming curve, and doing all those things. Because if we don't do all of these things, the situation becomes very expensive. Also, one of these things probably kicks in before the others, which is probably sea ice. So if we prevent the collapse of sea ice, we'll probably take care of the other items. And so what we're looking at doing is spending billions of dollars on additional R&D to save trillions of dollars in climate-related costs. And one might think of this as an engineered approach to climate change, where we calculate the lowest cost way to fix this. Okay. Before we begin, let's review the problem. We have carbon dioxide emissions in this illustration represented as a faucet, and then the first bathtub on the left has water in it that's proportional to the amount of water or to the amount of excess carbon dioxide in atmosphere relative to 150 years ago, and that causes warming. And then we have other sources of warming, such as methane and declining sea ice. And so global warming is proportional to the sum of all the water in the tubs. So global warming is average temperature increase per year. And then the faucet is 40 gigatons of carbon dioxide being emitted into the atmosphere each year. So if we turn down the faucet slightly, or even a lot, we still have the water in the tubs. So in a sense, we have two problems. There's the faucet, the carbon dioxide emissions, and the global warming. So if we're doing R&D to the extent to solve the problem, we're doing R&D for each of these. So for the faucet, we're looking at R&D to drive down the cost of 24/7 green energy to below that of fossil fuel. And we're looking at using known technologies with favorable cost models, meaning we don't have time for a scientific discovery, and we need to get the cost down. So we need to look at the cost to do different things and focus on those technologies. And for the bathtubs, we need a surge of R&D to determine how to reflect sunlight at a reasonable cost and without harm. And the way to do that with a favorable cost model is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI. Now, is there documentation that describes climate moonshot? Turns out there's a 80-page document on the internet. It's open source, which means it's available for anyone to use in any way. And if they don't like what's in this document, they can edit so they can change it. So this describes a moonshot, but if anybody wants to put together their own moonshot, they're welcome to do that. And also, if someone doesn't want to read 80 pages, there's 2 videos out on the internet that are at YouTube. They're 10 minutes each, and they summarize moonshot. Now, the suggested moonshot divides the problem into 10 different research areas with roughly $1 billion allocated to each over 5 years. So in total, that's $10 billion spent over 5 years, with $10 million for the initial phase 1. And that supports writing proposals, designing machines, developing experiments, etc. So moonshot area number 1, and this would receive roughly $1 billion over 5 years. And again, we're looking at spending billions of dollars to save trillions. So we're thinking about how to spend large amounts of money to fix the entire problem. So moonshot area 1 is to improve climate models. We need to calculate how much sunlight needs to be reflected back into outer space, and when and from where. And our current climate models are not doing a good job of predicting observations, which means they need to be improved. So area 1 is where we have a surge of funding in improving climate models. And so our understanding of clouds are not able to predict the behavior of clouds. So we need a surge of funding into cloud research. And then also we need to measure how much sunlight reflects back into outer space. So those are 2 areas that we know we do not understand well. And this involves experiments. And then experiments involves equipment to conduct the experiments, like airplanes and things that have to be developed. So this is a bit complicated. And also we have moonshot area 2, which is to conduct SAI experiments. So SAI is stratospheric aerosol injection, and experiments involve things like a plane that flies into the upper atmosphere that sprays, could be sulfur dioxide or calcium carbonate gas, into the atmosphere and then monitors over days to weeks to months. And that involves developing equipment as well. And moonshot area 3 involves developing a large airplane to spray gases into the upper atmosphere. And in order to do that with full-scale operations, you need 100 to 200 airplanes. And but before you have 100 airplanes, you have to build one. So moonshot area 1 is to build one of these. And also, to reduce costs, it needs to be automated. The flying needs to be automated, and the reloading and the refueling needs to be automated. So moonshot area 3 is to develop an automated large spray plane that can move 100 tons of material into the stratosphere every several hours and get that working. And then after that, then if government wants to do more, and it's up to government to go from there, they would have to be involved. And so that's either the Europeans, the Americans, or the Chinese, I think, that would be national leaders and policymakers that would conclude that this is better than not doing this. And also they can operate at a small scale too. They could have 4 spray planes running at every couple of hours, and maybe that's 3% of full-scale operations. They may want to do that for a year or 2. Also, we're looking at taking air pollution. Let's say we're emitting right now 70 million tons of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere today at ground level, and 1/10 of that could be taken, harvested, and then moved to an airplane and emitted at a high altitude. So we're looking at moving 1/10 or so of our current air pollution. We don't have to add sulfur dioxide to the atmosphere. So moonshot areas 1, 2, and 3 are reflecting sunlight back into outer space. And then moonshot area 4 is automating the construction of nuclear power plants. So we can look at the cost of nuclear power plants and look at the cost of the components. And the component costs are not particularly high. But instead, what's expensive is site construction. So if we automate site construction, we can get the cost of nuclear power way down. And then the cost of green electricity that's available 24/7 would be much less than carbon-based energy. And we can select a nuclear reactor that is currently running. There's 400 nuclear reactors running commercially right now. We can select one of those and then copy it, and that can be done quickly. If we work with an experimental reactor, then it typically takes 20 years to develop and certify and test, and we don't have time for that. So that's taking an existing reactor and then duplicating it and automating site construction. And then area 5 is to co-locate chemical processing equipment with nuclear power. So if we build a platform of chemical processing equipment in a shipyard or a factory, and we have a transportation system that can move that close to a nuclear reactor, then we can pipe molten salt or molten steam from the nuclear reactor to the chemical processing and do chemical processing, hopefully at a cost less than the traditional approach. And Moonshot Area 6 is to work on economic fusion. We currently have fusion reactors, but with each reactor you can calculate whether or not the design will produce electricity, and you can calculate the cost of the electricity. And economic fusion refers to a fusion machine that produces electricity that's cost competitive in an electricity market, which means that it produces electricity that costs less than natural gas-based electricity. So that's economic fusion. And one can start with a design before they build a machine. One can start with a design that by design achieves economic fusion. No, 99% of the fusion researchers are not doing that. They're working on designs that they know do not produce low-cost electricity. So this is a bit of a subset, but there are designs out there that by design achieve economic fusion. And they have certain technologies that need a surge of funding. And so a surge of funding would go into the technologies needed by those machines that by design achieve economic fusion. And area number 7 is to develop next generation solar farm, which is where we place solar material directly onto soil. And the solar material is plastic, it's 2-3 millimeters thick, and it can, in theory, lay down on soil. And there could be specialized equipment that install the material and maintain the material and also make the material. So that would use significantly less material, let's say, per watt of electricity. Right now we're using a lot of glass, steel, aluminum, concrete, etc. And area 8 is to develop standards needed in a green new world. For example, if we have a standard for a swappable car battery for EVs, then people can swap with a fresh battery quickly instead of waiting to charge, so we get convenience. And also there's multiple ways that can reduce cost, because you could then charge slowly as opposed to supporting fast charge capability, which drives up costs. So there's standards like EV swappable battery, and also would like standards for ships that can refuel with liquid ammonia. And then in theory, they could have a fuel cell that converts liquid ammonia to electricity to power ships. But to do that, you need standards by which the fuels can attach to a port and receive liquid ammonia. So that's another example of standards development. And area number 9 is to develop a vertical tunnel boring machine that operates at high temperatures so that we can bore down into the ground. And then once we're down 1 or 2 or 3 kilometers, then we can install pipes to access geothermal energy. And in area 10, that's the last area, that's develops policymaking tools. And in theory, we should have a website where we create, where the end user can specify their objectives, and then the computer can calculate how to achieve their objectives at the lowest cost. For example, if somebody wants to decarbonize a nation at the lowest cost or in lowest cost order, they should be able to calculate how to do that. Or if they want to prevent the collapse of sea ice and they trust a certain climate model, they should be able to specify that, click a button, and then get a plan for what it takes to achieve that objective. And for the most part, we're not driven by plans or calculations, but in theory, we could put money into websites that can make those calculations. And if a moonshot gets started, right now a moonshot is not started, but if it does get started, then I believe somebody would have to answer the following questions. Where does the initial money come from? Where does it go? what does it do, and who manages it? And I don't know the answers to these questions. I've done all sorts of work on Moonshot, but these are some questions that are, in a sense, the last part of this process. And so we have the question, is it possible for HPAC to save the planet with a climate moonshot? And if so, how might they get it started? I think for HPAC, HPAC would need to look at the following questions. Does HPAC want to set up a moonshot group? And if so, what might they do? That is, in theory, they could focus on the 4 questions. They could see if they can raise money, phase 1 money, recruit advisors, etc. So that's a question for HPAC, is what might you want to do with this? So that concludes my talk. And over on the left is this list of links for anybody who wants more information. Also, we have my contact information if anybody wants to chat on Zoom to discuss moonshot or climate change or energy. Available to chat. And I want to thank you for your time, and we will now open this up to questions.
Excellent, excellent. Well, you've really challenged us as an organization by your provocative concept of HPAC engaging in developing a moonshot. And I know that we've been discussing many things kind of related to what you are proposing, but it should be the grist for a lot of interesting questions and discussion now, and hopefully in future discussions that we could promote through, as you suggested, the development possibly of a working group that would take this forward. So let's open up the I don't see any hands up on the screen. Would anyone want to jump in at this point?
I'm happy to open up the conversation. I really admire your vision and passion, Glenn, and I think it opens up an amazing basis for conversation. So when we look at the moonshot concept, it was September 1962 that President Kennedy said we'll put a man on the moon and bring him safely back within this decade. And that was achieved 7 years later in 1969, which is a really astounding human achievement. And it's entirely possible, I think, that it's possible, as you say, to solve climate change with a similar ambitious timetable. That is, that if there were a leader who had the power and the vision and the will to express that demand, that it would be entirely possible. Now, it's not going to happen straight away. You know, it's very far, for example, from President Trump's way of thinking to call for such a moonshot, and yet I do get the feeling that the sort of vision that you're articulating is a lot more bipartisan in terms of U.S. politics than the usual approaches to climate policy led by the Democrats. And then there's also the big challenge of the moonshot was a national event, just entirely within U.S. sovereignty, but solving climate change is an international task, and so it requires an international moonshot. And so there's that whole governance agenda that I'd like to come back to, but I'll just make those comments to start to seek your response.
Sure. If it's $10 million to get started, and that supports proposal writing, that supports rough designs of machines, then you've got a sponsor who comes in with $10 million, and then you've got, I don't know how many people are involved, dozens or maybe 100 people are involved. And the governments don't necessarily block that activity, and the political parties don't get involved in this. So if you're operating at a $10 million R&D level, that's between a handful of researchers and the funding source. And then going forward, you need support from foundations and high net worth individuals, and their government doesn't necessarily block what's being done either. So that's something that's helpful. That is, we're not asking the Trump administration for anything. Also, there may be times when government collaborates with some of these activities, and there may be some governments that get involved in Moonshot. That's a possibility.
So, for example, I've been particularly interested in the potential role of the insurance industry in view of the commercial damage that they face from escalating climate change, and so targeting industries like insurance and banking and agriculture that face major loss of profitability from unchecked climate change, and asking them to construct a lobby that would be able to focus on themes like sunlight reflection that you're describing.
Yeah.
So let's say we have Mike McCracken, who has his hand up.
Yes, Mike.
Yeah. Hi, Glenn. I have a colleague who basically says, we already have fusion. It's only 8 minutes away, and we have a way of collecting it with solar. And the main problem is actually redistributing it and moving it around the world. You don't mention transmission at all in your list, and yet that's actually we know the technology to do it. We just have to do it. And so I guess what I'm concerned about is the first thing is to convince people we got a problem, we're going to actually work on it, and going to have us, that something would, we'd put together something reasonable about what one would do. I guess my sense is you've dispersed it across an awful lot of different things to try and achieve at the same time or pace. And, it's really the case that I don't know if I've mentioned before, if you look at Google Earth and look at just west of Antelope Valley, California, you'll see where California put in a transmission line for a few $1 billion, and it attracted $60 billion of private sector investment putting in solar. There are these leverage points to do it. And so what's California going to do but put in another line to go out and get these things? The problem is really distributing the energy around, going to having been almost recruited into the fusion program way back in 1970 or so. And it's still got a good ways to go. That seems like something that is so far off that we'll just not have it in time. The same sort of goes, in my view, to nuclear or something, and the cost of it. A lot of these things are going to take a good bit of time, and we just don't have time, it seems to me, for a lot of this. We've got to really sort of deal with what we can right now. And right now, the holdups are, in my view, transmission and convincing the public to do things and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Glenn?
Okay.
So there's a couple of issues. One is with solar. So the sun burns bright, roughly 6 hours out of every 24. So if we build up solar to the point of saturation, we can get roughly 25% of our electricity from solar. And then electrical power generation accounts for roughly a third of our carbon dioxide emissions. So we take a third times a quarter, that's a 12th. Though if we build up solar to saturation, we can reduce carbon dioxide emissions by roughly 8% or so. And also we have GDP growth of 3%. So over 20 years, 3% GDP growth increases GDP by 80% over 20 years. So if it takes us 20 years to build up our solar to saturation, and we knock down CO2 emissions by 8%, and then we also have an 80% increase from GDP growth, we're still, given those two components, we're still up 72% on our CO2. And a similar situation exists with wind power. There are limits. And also with replacing coal-fired power plants with natural gas, we have limits. We have only so many coal-fired power plants to replace. And also with building of hydroelectric dams, we run into limits as well. There's only so many places where one can build low-cost dams. So with all this, we run into all sorts of limits. And so we can look at and estimate what kind of things that we can do going forward. But also with the MIT En-ROADS Climate Solutions software, we can dial in a policy where we increase the cost of fossil fuel by a factor of 4 using taxes, and then the simulator will estimate the impact on average global temperature. And according to the software, average global temperature with and without this treatment just keeps going up. So even with massive policy, we get the average global temperature just keeps going up. And so, it begs the question, what is the plan, and can we quantify? Can we quantify plan? And the En-ROADS software is one way of taking, some policy and quantifying on and see what effect that has on the average global temperature. In many cases, we don't like what we see. And then we're back to the question of plan. What is our plan? What do we want to do?
So have you looked at what Sandy McDonald has done, and in the proposal for a high voltage direct current network kind of thing? And he's proposing a thing. The question on hours of solar or hours of wind, what matters is how the system is supplying stuff. And so he basically talks about solar and wind. There'll be some geothermal. There is some existing nuclear. There's going to have to be for a while some natural gas before you go to biogas or something like that. But it's as a system. I mean, that's the trouble. Trump sort of says solar only provides for a while or wind only does it for a little bit. Well, yeah, that's if only you look at one facility in one place. If you spread the facilities across and can link them by high voltage direct current, so you can move energy long distances at low cost, which we can't do now, you come out with a quite different approach to doing it. And what the situation is right now is if you provide, as California has done, if you provide a grid, the private sector is out there waiting to put all kinds of different things onto the grid. So the issue is creating a network that you can do. And I don't know if you've looked at his articles about it. I can just send you.
I've seen there's been proposals with supergrid, and there was a U.S. Energy Secretary under President Obama who advocated, I believe, for a so-called supergrid. With the electricity markets, they tend to operate at lowest costs. That is, the consumers tend to not want to pay a green premium, and regions are competing with other regions, and nations compete with other nations, companies compete with other companies. They tend to not want to incur additional costs by paying a green premium. So it seems like at large scales, we don't see people wanting to pay a green premium. So we have to get the cost down on the green product. And if we can automate the construction of nuclear power plants, in theory, we could get the cost of green electricity to be significantly less than carbon-based electricity. So that's one approach. But I understand people have been advocating for a super grid for many years now. I haven't seen a lot of interest in that, even under Biden. Biden was big with electrical power. He said, I want to put $1 trillion into this, and climate change is a big problem. And so then, what did he achieve? I don't know.
Yeah, but
let's move on. We'll flag that, Mike. Supergrid is one issue within this broader context. Let's move on and get some more questions.
Okay.
We have Ron next up.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Glenn.
It is indeed a provocative presentation. I did miss the very beginning, but I imagine you were talking about basically uh, uh, geoengineering, reflectivity, various ways to do that, which of course, we are on board with. Um, I do want to my major. We've had this discussion before. I think a little bit in the NOAC discussion, session. But I'm concerned that you're the focus on technology to the exclusion of actually it kind of builds on what Mike was saying. The exclusion of the social distribution dimension. Uh, I think is concerning because most of the world, the major problem is in the developing world. That's where we really have to uh, you know let me backtrack a little bit. First of all, on the we all agree, I think, that without intervention we're basically cooked. We if, in the near term, if we don't get a way to cool the planet quickly, we are in deep trouble. So that's in the next 25 years or so. We've got to get the temperature down. And the only way we can do that is really through some kind of geoengineering intervention, reflectivity. SAI is probably the primary candidate at this point, as far as we know. So that's stratospheric aerosol injection. So I think we agree on that. And I don't even want to go into all the energy transition because in my view, the long-term transition, the fundamental transition to a renewable economy has to do with it's very linked to the power, the way to the structure of our society, the concentration of power in and capital in certain hands, and the inability to move that outward to the 80 or 90% of the world that where this is really necessary. So right now, actually, on that score, so on both of those dimensions, both the transformation, the long-term transformation that's absolutely necessary. I think we all agree on that as well. We need to get the GHGs down to zero. We need to get the stuff out, which could take a very long time, actually. Uh, and we need intervention. But the question is, uh, the right now it appears to me that the most, China is actually the major force rolling this out. They're doing supergrids. There's a lot of work at Allen Twos and others. There's a huge, high voltage transmission already built in China, doing exactly what Mike said. Getting the energy from the high plateau in the western regions to the eastern, the big cities in the east, uh, and it is extremely successful. So and they are leading that on a kind of massive it's a Marshall Plan on steroids out into the third world, the developing world, Africa, all over the world. The Chinese are pushing solar, wind, all this stuff. So I think they're the leading edge. Second category would be the EU that has got a cap and trade and carbon tax system that is actually, they're the only region in the world that's actually cut emissions since 1990. And third is market forces. So, I think realistically, if we want the geoengineering to get out there, we are going to need a power, a large country, a group of countries, hopefully, to sponsor it. I don't think the private sector is going to take on what is basically a global public good. It's not a profit thing. It's a save humanity thing. It's a war. It's like a World War II kind of thing. That's the kind of thinking we need for this. So on that score, I am. So I know I'm getting a long speech, and that's not what I want to do. It's too long. So the basic issue is let's be realistic. I mean, we can propose solutions, and we're all doing it. You're doing it. We've done it. Lots of people are working on that. But we have to be realistic about how this stuff is going to be implemented. And, we hope it's going to be implemented for altruistic reasons. It may not be, but I think we do have to push in that direction. And so my question to you is, you know, I think it would be better to be it's not I have the technology here, I'm going to save the planet. I think it would be better to frame this in a way as something that I'm thinking of, say, I mean, I don't know that the Stardust thing will work, but at least it's being framed as something, not that we have all the solutions, Moonshot 1, 2 to 10 or whatever, but that we are offering a particular solution for a particular problem, and we're hoping to get some kind of large governments or something to buy into it. I'm sorry, it's a little bit of a rambling comment, but I'm hopefully I'm getting the gist out here. It's not a purely technology thing we're dealing with. It's a social and political and technology thing. So
Right.
let me stop there. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea with Moonshot is it's $10 million to get started with maybe one high net worth individual that gets behind it. And then that focuses on writing proposals and doing rough designs and things. So, and that's not blocked, or that doesn't involve government. So, and it's a couple of people off in the corner, so to speak, doing some work. So that does not involve decarbonization operations. I know there's all sorts of projects, development projects. That's not like a big development project to build the solar farms. Now in China, the cost of coal went up by a factor of 2 or so. So the solar farms now produce electricity that costs a lot less than their coal-based electricity. So they built 280 gigawatts in 2024, which is like 10 times more than what the US typically does in 1 year. And also, they don't want to be dependent on oil from the Middle East. So they're trying to gain energy security by producing energy locally. So they have these economic and security reasons for doing this massive surge in solar construction, which is great, but that's not climate change. They didn't say we're going to build solar farms because of climate change. It was when the cost of coal surged forward, then all of a sudden they got involved in building for a lot of solar. So what they want to do is they save money, but also they're trying to reduce coal consumption to try to reduce demand for coal and try to reduce that price. So that's what they're trying to do. But also there's models, there's simulators that look at what we're doing, what the world's doing, and then there's estimates for what's happening with carbon dioxide emissions, and there's estimates with what's happening with the average global temperature. It doesn't look good. Also, you've got GDP growth. So there's stuff that's being done, let's say, to decarbonize, and then you could say, okay, if there's 3% GDP growth, and then there's 2%, let's say, of stuff to help with decarbonization, you still are at +1. And again, we're back to quantifying, and also markets. People behave the way they want to behave, and so the idea is with $10 million to get a moonshot started, that's something that is sort of like small potatoes relative to everything else that's going on.
So
Yes.
just a quick response. I'm not saying China's doing this for altruistic reasons. I agree with you.
Ron,
They
I
have
think
all
you've had
kinds of
a lot.
reasons.
Ron,
and-
we need to move
The
on
second
and to
thing
other-
is the belief in science versus democracy. I think that's the key issue here. We've got an authoritarian regime that believes in science, and we've got the global democratic superpower that apparently doesn't. And
Okay, Ron, we need to move on. Yeah. Well, we have Eric from Pickwick Capital, and I think that will be a really good segue to look at a bit of the private sector response to this. And Eric, you want to take the floor?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I find myself agreeing with almost everything that everybody has said. And it's kind of, I think well, thank you for inviting me, Glenn, and nice to meet you all. I'm sitting in Cambridge, Massachusetts, probably not far from Glenn. I don't know where you all are. But I think it's really, both and or all of the above. So yes, I'm a big believer in R&D, and Greentown Labs is the largest clean tech incubator or climate tech incubator right in the Boston area now, and that's a huge part of it. I also like what Rocky Mountain Institute said, that we need radical deployment, which is kind of where partly where my work is. And it's about both stopping putting water in the tub and taking water out. So I'm certainly down for that idea. And just to give a couple specifics, like I have 3 companies I'm raising money for now, which two of which are taking carbon away from the atmosphere. One is regenerative farming on a massive scale, like we're talking 50,000 acres, not, a little farm in upstate Vermont or something. And then, enhanced geothermal, all the levels of geothermal that are happening right now and being deployed. And the last one I just highlight is a carbon sequestration company that just got a deal with a coal plant. So we may not like coal, but if you can I think they produce about 3 million tons of carbon dioxide a year, and they're in Wyoming, and they're not going to be shutting down anytime soon. This technology, the coal plant is funding the first of a kind plant at a very large scale, and it's backed by ratepayers. So they basically have an agreement for ratepayers to pay to sequester the carbon in Wyoming, of all places. And they want the business there. They recognize that the future is coming. And this is investable right now. Like these are projects that are happening. So I would say yes, R&D for new ideas and new technologies in certain targeted areas. And I could maybe quibble a little bit on maybe, which areas to focus on, but I think carbon sequestration should be there. And how do you maximize this? You get these companies that are near commercialization, and you get them over the hump, like early stage investment. That's Greentown Labs, and then later stage is where they're really ready to deploy. And then my other hat is building decarbonization with a company called Greener U, which is making buildings much more efficient. So I would say the business part of it is really a big engine for deployment, and there's multiple levels to make that happen. So yeah, thank you for the presentation, Glenn, and for everybody's comments. And that's my quickie summary of some thoughts.
Thank you, Eric. Rob, would you like to react to that? Glenn, would you like to react?
So I think there's a lot of projects being done, but also if we look at average global temperature, it's moving along. We have global carbon dioxide emissions, which are increasing. And to solve the problem with decreasing carbon dioxide emissions, we would have had to have started a campaign to decarbonize to zero emissions decades ago. I mean, we in theory, to bend the global warming curve, we need carbon dioxide emissions close to zero, and then we start to bend the global warming curve. So right now, we're sort of, we've been doing all sorts of activities, like there's the Greentown Labs, and a lot of companies have been working on climate change, but still the position that the world is currently in, with carbon dioxide emissions increasing and average global temperature is hitting records every couple of years, and the warming rate is increasing. It suggests we need to, a lot more than what we've been doing, and plan and quantification, where we quantify to see if we do this, we're going to get that. If we do this over here, we'll get that. And so I think we need that kind of thing as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just one little coda is the carbon sequestration company can do direct air capture, and regenerative farming is also pulling carbon out of the air. So, I agree that we need to do both. So, yes.
Well, let's turn to Robert Chris, who often gives us a dose of reality in his reactions to these matters. Robert?
You make me sound like a bad news guy. Anyway, it is obviously wonderful to hear about all these initiatives. Unfortunately, I missed the first 10 minutes of the presentation. So I came in, I think, at about Moonshot 5 or 6. And so all I saw were a series of propositions for effectively for green energy. There may have been some solar radiation management in the earlier part. I'm not sure about that. But what I'm struggling with here, and all of the green energy stuff is wonderful. I mean, I've got no issues with that at all. I'm not going to criticize it. I don't want to, I want to support it. But what I am struggling with is the link between that potential growth in green energy and climate change and the reduction in surface temperatures. I just don't, I'm interested to know how you relate the two. On what basis do you assume that all this additional green energy will drive down will stop temperatures increasing and actually drive them down to safer levels. You know, what's the basis for that?
I'll tell you what, that's an excellent question. The question was, how do we quantify the impact of policy and carbon dioxide emissions reduction? And this software is the best way to do that. And I just put in a $200 ton tax on carbon dioxide, and this shows average global temperature in the black line without the tax, and then the blue line shows average global temperature over the next 75 years with the tax. And so this software shows that we could do practically anything, and also we can increase the price of natural gas, oil, and coal with taxes, and we still get average global temperature just keeps taking off, even with, and right now, the cost of fuel, oil, natural gas, and coal, we increased it by a factor of 4. Okay, and the blue line shows what happens to average global temperature with this treatment. Black line is without it. So this is another way of saying, with massive policy that goes way beyond what we're doing, we still have, one might refer to this as runaway climate change. And this software quantifies impact of policy, but for the most part, very few people, it seems, tend to get involved in quantifying impact of policy. But this is an example of doing that.
Okay, can I just pick this up with you, because I'm not quite sure what parameters you've used there, but 2.6 degrees is still way over the top. Okay, that is not safe territory. So if you're if you're saying that if we did everything you proposed, we'd be at plus 2.6, then we're screwed. So
well, this is the MIT. This is the official MIT software. By the way,
I'm not like cherry finding some weird website.
It's actually very responsible.
That may well be the MIT software, but that doesn't mean to say that we need to necessarily acknowledge it as being true. Indeed, it almost certainly isn't true, because it's a model like all the other things. The problem is establishing how untrue it is. I'm not saying it's not useful. I'm just saying we shouldn't get too hung up by saying, this is what En-ROADS says, therefore that's what will happen. That is clearly not the case. But what I would particularly like to ask you is, when you're using the En-ROADS model, which is very largely market-driven, because one of the things that you talked about as you did that was about altering the price of carbon and the price of various elements of it. Why do you assume, or why does MIT assume, that the Jevons paradox, which is applied in every single major energy transition for the last 200 years, will not apply on this occasion?
Well, they're looking at the cost of solar power, the cost of wind power. They look at saturation of solar and wind, and also they work with the IPCC climate models. They're doing a lot of things that I think are responsible. I understand this is uncomfortable, though, to show this kind of data, but also we have the bathtubs and the faucet picture that we have in the talk here. Let's see, we go to stop share and then start share. Okay, so you have carbon dioxide emissions, the faucet, and then you can turn down the faucet, right? But you still have the water in the tubs. The global warming, the amount of warming you get each year, is proportional to the total water in all the tubs. And so so you can crank the faucet a bit, but you still have all this warming that's occurring from, other sources, call them warming sources. And it's 150 years of carbon dioxide emissions that built this up. So the MIT software is taking all this into consideration.
Okay, fine. So let me I'll close with this question, Glenn. I'm not quite sure exactly where you're coming from on the detail or on the numbers. I'm into the numbers. The numbers matter to me. So if what you're saying is that if this Moonshot proposals that you're promoting were successful, we'd end up at some point in the not too distant future with warming peaking at 2.6%, 2.6 degrees centigrade. Is that good enough? And if it isn't good enough, let me just finish the point. And if we wanted to get down to 1.5 degrees, or even more sensibly down to 1 degree, which is what would probably be truly safe, is what you're proposing plausible?
Oh, okay. What I'm proposing is, let's see, that we solve the problem with the surge of R&D, and we define solving the problem as preventing the collapse of sea ice, which means we have to keep the average global temperature probably below 2.0 degrees C to do that. Plus, we're looking at all these other things, and now also bending the global warming curve. And then to do that, we need stratospheric aerosol injection.
Mm-hmm.
That is to achieve these objectives.
Okay, well,
and then
I just make this one final comment, Glenn. I just make this one final comment. All of these are very laudable and desirable objectives, but they need to be quantified. And at the moment, from what you're presenting here, I don't see anything that is plausible in terms of climate change. I'm not saying that the things that you're proposing shouldn't be done. Absolutely, they should be done. It's all good stuff, but it isn't sufficient. It's not sufficient to address the global warming problem we confront. That's how I see this now.
So this is it. So in here, we calculate the percentage of sunlight that needs to be reflected back into outer space with SAI to achieve these objectives.
Sure. These are sentences. These are just words. Where are the numbers? Where are the graphs? Where's the evidence?
Okay, so there's a paper by there's a paper by Wake Smith that I can forward you the link that does the calculation.
He's an aviation specialist. Wake Smith is an aviation specialist. You know, he's not with the greatest respect, nice guy, very bright guy, very good guy. But you know, he's not a climate scientist. He's an engineer, and you know, this doesn't add up. I'm sorry, it doesn't add up to me.
Yeah,
Great stuff. It all needs to be done, but it doesn't add up. Right. Move on, Dennis.
Thank you, Robert. Let's move. Yeah, let's move to Gene Fry and then Greg Slater. Gene, what are your comments?
Gene,
okay, sorry, I'm unmuted now. Just comment on the use of the En-ROAD model. Its climate sensitivity is set to 3 in the base case, and it peaks at 5, and climate sensitivity is a good bit more than that. I mean, we're at that's true of many models that have that problem. En-ROADS is one of them.
Right. We've noticed that. Thank you, Jane. Greg?
Thanks. First of all, thank you, Glenn, for the presentation. Appreciate it. I'm wondering why on the SRM you didn't mention any of the other competitors to SAI, which there are, and people in this audience. There are people in this audience who are behind them, like MCB and Seth Clark has multiple ways. But so I'm wondering why you don't consider those. And then secondly, on the En-ROADS tool, I can research this myself, but does it allow you to input various forms of SRM into the mix to see what the effect is? Those are my two questions.
It doesn't do SRM, but it does direct air capture, but it does not support SRM.
Yeah. Right.
And then with direct air capture, it does not cost. It doesn't do costing for land use changes with there's some things that are missing from the tool.
Well, there are a couple local people in this group who have developed tools, which you might talk to them. One of them is Robert Chris here, and the other is Bruce Barker. So there are tools that do allow. Well, at least Bruce's does. I've forgotten about Robert's, but Bruce allows the inclusion of SRM as a anyway. And so that was that. But anyway.
Yeah. Now I'm familiar with Bruce's tool. He doesn't do costing on the SRM, but he's got SRM in there. But I'm familiar with that.
Yeah. We have these two models that are now able to predict temperatures or project temperatures with the inclusion of SRM, which I think is a big contribution. All right. Well, I don't.
It's pretty outrageous that that En-ROADS doesn't include solar radiation management, because like I haven't really looked at En-ROADS myself much, but looking at it now, nothing that they do about carbon really bends the temperature curve, and yet there's strong scientific research suggesting that a concerted SRM deployment would bend the temperature curve down below 1 degree by 2100. So there's this whole culture and literature and politics that's simply ignoring the main climate solution.
Yeah.
Yes, that's absolutely true, Robert. And that's, of course, why Bruce Parker and Robert Chris have done the job of doing new models, which do incorporate SRM, because NRO has not taken that step.
Can I just say, Dennis, that just one quick point. Bruce's model is based on En-ROADS, and he's added the SRM function in it. My model is based on FAIR, which is a pure climate model. There's no economic consideration at all. There's no valuations. There's nothing about dollars at all. It's just a climate model that tells you about surface temperature changes and atmospheric concentrations and sea level rise. So, and it adopts a very different approach. The MIT model has all sorts of questions about it, which trouble me greatly.
And gentlemen, it seems that the type of program that Glenn is proposing could be a very excellent source of inputs into these models to look at options, look at trajectories, because I think that's the major the major critique that's come through here, Glenn, is that it's very difficult to see the end of the process. You've got a $10 billion program of research, and what will it produce in terms of temperature in the short, medium, and long run? So that might be something to consider. But I'd like to move on to the basic. Where do we go from here? Now, you've proposed a $10 billion research program with 10 areas. You've proposed that if $10 million were available, then that program could be developed into an operational plan, which could attract the funding. And this is where I think we come into the picture here. How would the HPAC work together with you and your team in terms of taking this forward? Do you have some specific ideas?
So I guess let's say you've got 300 people or so on your mailing list, and let's say some of them perhaps are interested in this. And so perhaps we could put together a Climate Moonshot team within HPAC of people who are interested in Moonshot. And I understand many people are busy. Many people may not be interested in R&D. They may be more interested in policy. They may be more interested in decarbonization activities. And this is not decarbonization activities. This is more developing technology that reduces the cost of green energy. So it's a different approach. But let's say there's some people, and I don't know how many people, let's say it's somewhere between 3 and 30 people who are interested in Moonshot, then perhaps we can meet and then talk about things like, where might the money come from? Where might it go? What might it do? Who might manage it? And also, if there's people looking for work, some of that money could end up potentially paying them in some, I don't know exactly what kind of opportunities are available, but there may be some people out there among the HPAC community. So one possibility is we send out an email to the HPAC list saying we're setting up a Moonshot group. It's a subgroup. And if for anybody interested in this, our first meeting is the following. And, our goal is to, we could think about an email that meets the satisfaction of Dennis Garrity that he's comfortable with. So that's, I would say, a suggested next step. And then see what happens at the meeting. And if there's nobody there, then okay, that you get your answer. But if you got 10 people and they're all, ready to roll up the sleeves and do something, then that's fantastic. And then the next question is how many people show up at meeting number 2? Because sometimes if a meeting's not interesting, you get some people at the first meeting, but not many at the second. But anyway, that's another question, is how many people to get at the second meeting. But that's something we could do, is to push forward with that process.
Very good, very good. I'd be very happy to work with you, Glenn, to assess interest in having such a working group develop, and we can test the waters and see. My impression is that we have had many discussions about what HPAC may do to support a very vigorous visionary research program. And we've talked about, for example, Silver Lining has proposed a $13 billion research program to the US Congress. And that's all on their website, Silver Lining website. And, we could look at comparing what's in their research program with what you're proposing. I'm sure there's a lot of overlap. And your business plan, we could look at the business plan in more detail, see which would be the priorities, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that, I think, would kind of complement the main thrust that we have been really working on over the last couple of years, which is to build the understanding, awareness, education of policymakers that we've got to develop a first movers coalition of vulnerable countries to actually call for a new climate plan and the research program that would support it. So the governance side is directly linked with what you are looking at here. It's not something separate. To get the kind of money you're talking about, you've got to have policymakers on board. You've got to have vulnerable countries speaking out and championing this, or it's never going to go anywhere. So I think we need to link those two together. And that's another area where HPAC, I think, really excels in terms of what we're doing internationally at the national and global level in developing this first movers coalition. So we can add that to the picture: the technology, research program, the governance mechanisms that will support that and move forward to eventual deployment.
Yeah. So if there's an HPAC Moonshot group, they could reach out to Silver Lining, they could reach out to some policymakers and have conversations and get their input.
That would be a very interesting thing to do, reaching out to a number of our colleague members of affiliate organizations to join us on that, join the working group. It needn't be within HPAC, but something broader. I see Ron is back with another question.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. I'll try to be short here. So one of the distinctions between really, I think one of the key things that HPAC is working on is trying to advocate for engineering testing, that is applied science engineering testing of near-term global cooling methods, particularly SAI and other methods as well, though. And so that it's really not at this point strictly kind of modeling research or the kind of research that has been done. If we want to shave the peak by 2035 or 2050, as many of the models presume, these are geoengineering models, we've got to start working on it now. And so this is the kind of thing, I'm sorry, but for investors to invest in this, they need to have somebody who will be willing to pay for this for the actual implementation at some point. So the initial thing is just to get the thing gradually develop a way to do this. So I think that's where we have to be a little bit more practical and modest, I think, in terms of how we move this forward. That's my view anyway.
Very, very, very practical. Yes. Well, are there any other interventions before we close today and kind of sum up where we go from here? Yes, Gmok, floor is yours.
Thank you. I did a thought experiment with an LLM the other day, and I used everything that I know of, which we have available to us now. And without any new legislation or regulation, I fed it into the LLM to look at the carbon deadlines, the carbon budget deadlines. 1.5 degrees C is July 2029. 2 degrees C is 2047, according to the Potsdam Institute, which runs that website. And so I backcasted from them and said, those dates, and said, given all of these techniques and technologies that we have available, even without new legislation or regulation, can we meet those deadlines? And the LLM came back and said, yeah, we'll peak out at 1.6 around 2030, 2029, but we'll taper down over the next 2 decades or less, using these technologies and techniques that we know of now consistently and globally. And I put the URL to that conversation with the LLM in the chat. So if people are interested in that, they can take a look at that. The other thing that I find interesting in this discussion is that nobody has mentioned electrification. We have generated about 100 quadrillion BTUs per year, generate and consume in terms of energy, according to the Lawrence Livermore National Labs. And they say that about 2/3 of that is rejected energy. It does no useful work. The vast majority of that is combustion losses from fossil fuels. So if you electrify everything that you can, which is what happens with renewable energy, you don't need 100 quadrillion BTUs, of energy to be generated. Maybe you need 60 quadrillion, maybe you need 50 quadrillion BTUs, and that eliminates the combustion and the greenhouse gases from combustion. So I was surprised that nobody brought that up, but I appreciate what you guys are doing, trying to talk about these hard problems, and there are other ways to go. And if you're interested, take a look at what I've put in the chat, and let me know what you think, because there's possibilities there.
This is interesting. Could you send me an email with that background as well, so that I could share it with the members?
Well, the URL is in the chat.
Okay, I'm having some difficulty finding it.
It's right at the beginning.
Right at the beginning. Okay, right. All right. Thank you very much. What is your name, actually? Is it Moak is your last name?
George.
George Moak. Okay.
George Mokray. George Mokray. I've been doing energy information for a long time, looking at what's happening at Harvard and MIT for 30 years. And then since COVID, a lot of things are online. So I look online at what's happening, at public lectures that are available to anybody who's interested in climate, energy, and environment.
Very
George,
good.
if I could just note that there has been a lot of discussion of electrification. Maybe you didn't catch it, but the whole bit about the high voltage grid and the solar. I mean, I think it's, people have talked about
I understand
that.
what you're talking about.
Let me just finish. We are generally, I think most people here are really focused on the kind of near-term intervention. But we have talked about those other things.
No, I understand that there's conversation about high voltage electrical grid and replacing the grid and that kind of stuff, but I didn't hear the fact that if you electrify everything, you get rid of most of the combustion losses which produce greenhouse gases, and I think that's fundamental. I'm not particularly interested in geoengineering. I think that's, personally, I think it's the wrong way to go. I'm glad that it's out there. I'm glad that people are studying it, but I'm not. That's not where I put my energy.
Okay, well, thank you. Are there other interventions before we close? We're 15 minutes over the hour right now, but it's been very, very interesting. And I see the potential for carrying on with this conversation with Glenn through a working group. Okay, well, great. And that's what we'll do, Glenn. We'll look at the prospect of working with you in proposing a working group and bringing in as many people from HPAC and affiliated organizations that we can to join that conversation, and then getting down to the issues of how you go about, say, refining the business plan, how you get the kind of funding you're talking about, which is absolutely necessary to achieve these 10 areas of intervention. So, so I look forward to continuing that discussion with you, Glenn, and carrying this forward.
Very good.
Glenn, you have any final remarks before?
No, I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us today. And if anybody wants to chat on Zoom, I'm available. You can send me an email. And if anybody has any ideas for videos to produce, I produced 21 videos over the last 6 months. And if anybody has any video ideas, I'm open to hearing them.
Amazing, amazing. And for the benefit of our members, Glenn's email is copied in the email announcement for this Zoom. So if anybody wants to get in touch with him, he's encouraging further conversations bilaterally. So you can find his email in the announcement.
Right.
Also, at the MIT has something called the MIT Alumni for Climate Action Club. And then they have a group within the club, which is the Climate Moonshot Group, which is 11 people. And so it's possible that there's some people there that may have some common interest with some of the HPAC people. So it's possible there could be a collaboration between those two groups.
That would be very interesting to explore, to open up that interactions with people outside of HPAC. And I would just note that 2 of our members are displaying proudly their new ball caps. Make the Earth cool again. And they're looking good, gentlemen, looking good. Yes. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and we'll carry on these discussions.